Thank you so much for having me. This is a great gathering so far. I love how you have every part of the chain here, from producers to chefs. It's really unique. I go to a lot of food conferences. So my name is Helena Bottemiller Evich. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of FoodFix, which is a new newsletter about food policy that I know some of you are already reading. If you're not, you can sign up. I was at Politico for a long time covering food policy there. I've covered food and ag for almost 15 years, so I'm really delighted to be here. This is a fascinating and very important topic. I've already had a lot of conversations with you all about Prop 12. There's a lot of buzz in this crowd about this topic. But for those of you who maybe haven't been following this saga super closely, briefly, California back in 2018 had a ballot initiative that passed overwhelmingly. It was about almost 63% support. That ballot initiative called for minimum space standards for egg-laying hens, for breeding pigs, and for calves used for veal. And it really sparked a flurry of legal challenges from primarily the pork industry. It was went into effect briefly in 2022, and then a judge got involved and halted enforcement, causing what I sense is a fair amount of chaos. And then the industry got the Supreme Court to review the law, and they challenged it, right? They're saying it was unconstitutional. California can't tell other states what to do. And the Supreme Court upheld the law, surprising a lot of people. It was a 5-4 decision, but really upheld the idea that actually states do have the right to set standards for products sold within their state. I'm not a con law expert, but that's my take on it. And so now we are in a situation where the industry is still fighting this, but it's sort of settled in the highest court, and we're in an interesting time. So we're going to get into that and what's next here. This is a great panel. You have folks who are really in the weeds on this stuff. You've been living this legal fight for a long time. Chris Oliviero, we've got two Chris's. I want to kick it to you first. Niman Ranch is, I think, the only pork company that has been fighting Prop 12 from day one. So there's a split in the industry here. Why did you get involved in this? I mean, this is a long, twisted legal battle. I don't imagine it's particularly fun to be in it. Why did Niman Ranch dive in, and where do you see this going right now?
Sure. We couldn't help ourselves. I mean, that's the simple answer. So if you go back to Paul when he started Niman Ranch, crates were never part of what he did. You know, he didn't want to go down that path. And you talk to Ron Martison or John Gilbert, or any of the farmers who were there at the beginning, they were looking for an alternative. So what Prop 12 is addressing is, one piece of what we believe strongly in. And, we think if you believe strongly in something, if it's part of your core values, then you have an obligation to stand up for it. You can't have it both ways. You can't hope to reap the reward, but be unwilling to lend your voice where it matters. And we don't normally get involved in public policy.
You don't really have lobbyists, right?
No.
I was asking about this. You're not kind of in the halls of Congress,
nope,
throwing your weight around. Yeah.
No, we definitely don't. But the industry, the trade groups were positioning that there was only one view on this topic. It was bad for farmers, right? That was the position, all farmers. And we know just from Niman, you have 500 farmers here. We know from other companies that were in support of Prop 12 but weren't saying anything. There's a lot of farmers nationally who believe in this. And, we took exception, especially when they started saying that this was going to be bad for small farmers. Because, we've talked about this, you'll hear me say it later, but, since I think the late 60s, 92% fewer people are raising hogs today. So you can't say the current model's been great for hog farming. And so when the trade's, primary argument is it's now suddenly bad for small farmers, well, they're already gone. Where was that argument 20 years ago, 30 years ago? So we felt compelled to get involved.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch the industry sort of contend with these changes. Julia, I want to kick it to you. For those of you not familiar, Compass Group is a major food service player, I think primarily on the West Coast, but also nationally. Why does a food service company jump in here. What is the business case for being supportive of Prop 12?
Yeah, well, I think we've heard it all morning. We've heard it from Paul and Ed and Ron. It's better for the animals. It's better for the environment. It's better for the farmers, and the consumers are demanding it. So, before Prop 12 took effect, we were all in, and we started working with a supplier to carve out a special product that would ensure that we met those requirements and that we could convert, before implementation date. And we've also seen sectors, many of our sectors throughout the U.S. convert to that product. So I think it's a real testament that it's wanted not just in California and other parts, so.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch it unfold. Chris, you are in the legal world. You are following all this closely. Is this ever going to be settled? Because now we see industry groups on Capitol Hill trying to get a provision in the Farm Bill known as the EATS Act to basically overturn Prop 12 and things like it going forward. Like, where are we headed? This is already, 5 years into this? Many more years if you were to zoom back to the previous propositions and things like that. Is it ever going to be settled?
I mean, I think so. I mean, basically you have these groups just trying to fight the future. As Ron mentioned earlier, this is question 3 in Massachusetts, and Prop 12 is just the popular will of consumers and voters being expressed in legislation. 25-year anniversary is 25 years ago that I started managing our family farm that was founded by my great-great-grandfather in 1838, the same as the Barrowman family. And, it just rips my heart out to see the way that animals are treated in factory farms compared to the way they were treated on our family farm and by all of our neighbors, and how you see animals just disappeared from the Midwestern landscape. And so a lot of Americans feel the same way. There's an ASPCA poll that shows that 94% of Americans think that animals raised for food shouldn't endure any abuse or cruelty. And now you're starting to see, but there's no laws that really protect the way animals are treated. They're categorically exempted from the Animal Welfare Act federally, and the majority of U.S. states exempt them from state cruelty codes. So that's why you have to kind of go around these legislatures, and you have these ballot initiatives where consumers are able to actually voice their concerns. Now, they can keep kind of trying to fight it, but again, you mentioned the Supreme Court case was a decision was 5-4, but that was over the balancing on the core constitutional question of whether Prop 12 was constitutional. 9-0, not a single member of the Supreme Court said that it wasn't constitutional. They disagreed on how you might balance that, but yeah, I don't know. So as you said, question 3 passed in 2018 or 2016. Prop 12 was
Prop 12, 2018.
Was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
They've had 7 and 5 years to prepare and get ready to follow the law, and instead chose to stick their heads in the sand and literally bet the farm on litigation. And I don't know who was giving them legal advice, but every court that's ever looked at these issues has thrown them out and said, get out of town. There's no constitutional question. I mean, California's 2010 egg law, there was tons of litigation over that by the egg industry. California banned the sale of foie gras, tons of litigation over that. And every court's just like, get out of town. There's no question here. So they kind of, it was a pretty foolish strategy to bet everything on litigation that went all the way to the Supreme Court and lost. And now they're scrambling to try and get a legislative fix. And as we've seen from the parade of mugshots this past week, the idea of overturning elections is sort of a hot button issue these days. And so basically now they've got this EATS Act, which you're essentially trying to anti-democratically overturn the will of voters in a state. And
and explain a little bit more about what it would do as written, because it's positioned as overturning Prop 12, but it would have far-reaching consequences if passed.
And this is sort of the latest incarnation of what was called the King Amendment with Iowa's own Steve King, who was a big states' rights proponent until his district was the largest egg producer. And when California passed this law, like, we can't possibly let states make their own rules. We need the federal government to come in and dominate. It's like, so it's going to be interesting to see. So what they're trying to do essentially is say that the Supreme Court decision, the timing couldn't have been worse in that this is a farm bill year. So
it might be a farm bill year.
Yeah, exactly.
Congress is kind of a shit show right now. If anyone's paying attention, am I allowed to say that? Yeah.
But when you have something that's unpopular,
yeah. Anyway, yes, but right before a farm bill cycle, yes.
Yeah, you have something that's unpopular and it couldn't pass on its own. So you have like a must-pass bill like the farm bill. Everyone tries to jack in their pet projects, and so that's what's trying to happen here, where they're trying to circumvent the Supreme Court decision. decision and then overturn the will of voters. But the way it's written, the definition of agricultural product, the fact that standards and conditions are defined nowhere in the bill, in 2018, we identified 3,200 different laws that could be affected by the King Amendment. Now they've narrowed it a bit, but now it's still 1,000 different laws over a whole host of different issues that all could be nullified under this. And so people are getting scared. So there's a letter sent last week by 171 members of Congress saying we don't want we don't want the EATS Act to be included in a farm bill. So I had to miss the farm tours yesterday because I had an emergency call with House Ag Committee staff because there's a narrower version of this floating around now. And even though it would narrow the scope, it still doesn't affect its constitutionality. It's still a complete violation of the 10th Amendment for the federal government to tell states what they can or cannot do. And so, I've been pretty positive from day one that we'd be able to kind of defeat this. But it's really, I'm just so grateful that we have both, farmers and producers and food service companies, aligned on this.
Yeah, and just for those of you who don't have the privilege or horror of following the Farm Bill every year, the situation is really that it maybe could get slipped into the House version. The Senate's not really in play here, but they have to compromise the bill. So the question is, could this type of provision get, negotiated in there in some way? The Farm Bill, though, is right now being very much threatened by the specter of a government shutdown, and so Congress has a lot of other problems to deal with before we get to this. But I'm hearing a lot of concern and sort of, to see 170 lawmakers write on one issue saying we don't want this in the Farm Bill, that's a lot of lawmakers. And the Farm Bill has to be bipartisan to pass ultimately. So it's one of those uniquely still bipartisan things. I want to get to this issue of sort of the stopping and starting that we've had here. I mentioned that a court stepped in right when this was going into effect in California to begin with. And now we're in this position where I think is it supposed to go into effect next year in California if nothing else come? Okay, so we're kind of stopping and starting. As you operate in the private sector, what has that meant? And now how are you looking at the uncertainty going forward? Well, maybe start with you, Chris.
Okay, so first off, the debate on Prop 12 has kept gestation crates in the media, for 4.5, 5 years, versus if the industry had just gone ahead and said, we're going to go ahead and take care of this.
Is that a PR win for the industry, or?
I think it's a PR win for us, honestly, because I don't think that people, when they see what a gestation crate is, say that's a really great, experience for any kind of an intelligent animal. So I think there's the benefit there, but it's been brutal for us. The people who are being punished the most are the suppliers and the farmers who've prepared for this. Right? They've done the work. They've made the investment. What's most important is how this is rolled out cannot hurt the farmers. Rolled out correctly, there will be additional cost to each farmer. But they, in turn, are able to charge more. The companies that are buying their pigs should be paying them more, and then, in turn, should be able to pass along those premiums to California. And by the way, the premiums are not projected to be very significant. Not the apocalyptic, great bacon shortage and, all of the horror stories that we keep hearing about.
California banning bacon. And,
correct.
Yeah.
And that's, it's
what are the cost projections? Do you know what they
So
are?
UC Davis, I think they were projecting $8 per person per year.
Okay. Yeah.
So not a big number. Now, you won't know until it's actually implemented, but we're going to have to distinguish between how much of the inflation that we see in California is because of the true cost, to raise animals differently, versus how much is due to an artificially created supply disruption by the industry being unwilling to ultimately, produce enough supply to meet demand.
And then there's also regular inflation. We
Yes,
were talking earlier about all of the incredible disruptions and all your inputs and all that. That will be hard to suss out, I'm sure. Julia, how are you looking at this in terms of compliance? It's settled for now. I think settled is an okay word to use, but there's a little bit of uncertainty. How do you see the food service space responding right now?
Yeah, definitely uncertainty and concern. Obviously, we're steering the course because, to Chris's point, the farmers who have already made those changes, and, you know, we have to stay committed to that. Definitely, you know, concern around the players in the industry that have been dragging their feet. Maybe gives them a little bit of wiggle room to back out, and then how are we going to meet the demand that the consumers and our clients are asking for?
Yeah. Chris, where do you see this heading next? I mean, maybe the EATS Act gets stopped or doesn't go through the Farm Bill. I think, honestly, the Farm Bill is in such peril anyway. But let's say it doesn't happen. What is next? Do you think more states are going to pass their own standards now that we have this Supreme Court decision? Like, what is sort of the landscape going forward? I mean, I know we have different scenarios with the EATS Act, but while that hangs in the balance, where are you looking on the horizon?
As I said before, I just think you can't really fight the future. I think as, you know, people have more access to information about how their food's produced, and as we learn more about animals and their capacity to sort of feel pain and suffer, people are factoring those decisions into the products they want to consume and how those products should be produced. So yeah, I do think you'll see more of it. I mean, you may know that 10 years ago or 8 years ago or so, United Egg Producers got together and they were going to pass a federal bill to just set a national standard, and it was actually the national pork producers that killed that. So I think you're going to see more states doing this for sure, and I think eventually you might see some national standards. One thing I think is ironic is that one of the complaints that you hear from the pork producers is that it's going to make the price of pork go up for consumers across country, which just isn't necessarily true. Like if you got a producer in North Carolina selling into Florida, how does that California affect their price? But when you just have seen that Smithfield just announced they're closing like 35 sow farms in Missouri because of the low price. We just had Smithfield themselves have to pay $75 million last year for illegally colluding to fix the price, artificially increase the price of pork. Seaboard just got busted, had to pay $10 million in June, and yet these are the same companies complaining about the price going up. It just seems a little incongruent there.
People are like grumbling. I can hear that. Yeah, I think it is one of those issues too that it's been so interesting to watch the different industries respond so differently. I don't know if you want to really quickly just explain the difference in how the egg industry has not fought back or as overtly. They're not like in the courts with.
Well, they did. So they fought really hard in 2010 when California passed a similar egg
but
law.
But lately,
and they lost, and they lost, and they lost, and they realized, like, oh, well, okay, this is the way the future's happening. We lost in court, and so they all converted. Many of them converted back in 2010 in order to. And again, this is simply a free market issue to me. It's not. No one's telling anyone to do anything. Those producers that decide they want to spend the extra money to build a slightly bigger cage in order to have access to the California market will do so. Those who think that's not profitable won't, and they can go sell their pork in Florida or Texas or Colorado, wherever. No one's really forcing anyone to do anything. So that's what I think is kind of the fundamental issue here is that the market's going to kind of decide this for itself.
Yeah, and that's sort of how it got ruled not unconstitutional, right? It's not like California setting rules between Missouri and Arkansas selling to each other. It's only if you want to sell to California. Of course, California is a massive market, so.
But it applies equally to California producers, and that was the key part.
Exactly, right. It's not like they're putting, special protectionist provisions up. Although, I mean, I don't know that any of us spend a lot of time thinking about the dormant commerce clause or whatever it was. So I won't get into the weeds there. We're going to take questions from the audience. So think for a minute about what you might want to ask this panel of experts about this issue. I want to briefly, before we do that, talk a little bit about how the private sector is going to comply. It needs to be like Prop 12 certified, or like and maybe for folks in this room that are in different parts of the supply chain, what, I guess, advice would you have for them thinking about how they're going to be complying with this if the EATS Act doesn't pass and sort of we're just continuing on with Prop 12 being the law of California going forward? Well, Julie, let's start with you because you're kind of in the middle of the farm to table.
Right, definitely. I think maybe a certification would be the best way forward, just to ensure that what the farmers are doing are compliant
and it could be like audited and you would have and it's not totally clear how California they've not fully laid out all the details, if I'm not mistaken. You're going to be compliant. Niman Ranch is compliant, so you're maybe not thinking as much about this.
Well, we had to certify 337 farms, and we're done. So,
Yeah. Okay,
you know,
so you're just ready to roll.
yeah, I mean, we had the plan laid out. We knew all the different certifying bodies. Our field agent team went to work with our farmers, and in the span of, 2.5 months, got it done. But I would say, for folks who haven't started, it takes some time, it takes some organization, and you want to coordinate it so it's not a burden on the farmers too.
Yeah, and I think that has really, it's been interesting to watch the industry divide too, because the companies that have fully prepared, you now see publicly going, we don't really support the EATS Act because we already figured out compliance or have some sort of bifurcated supply chain. So, and it is interesting also to watch industry be divided, because a lot of times on these issues, they're united. So I think we're going to take questions from the audience. There's a mic going around. Does anyone have questions about Prop 12 or what's next?
And if I could just add on to
go
the end of
ahead,
so when we were at the U.S. Supreme Court hearing last October, I ended up standing in line next to the guy who wrote the amicus brief for Minnesota pork producers.
Yeah.
And we were kind of talking about these free market aspects, and he fully agreed. I'm like, well, what's your concern? And he said the primary concern for Minnesota pork producers was having California inspectors, like jackbooted California inspectors, coming onto their property and coming onto their land. And that was a real concern, especially with biosecurity and stuff like that. And that seemed to me like something that easily could be sort of worked out. The fact that they were trying to oppose this whole law, or something, just the mechanics of it was sort of surprising to me.
And that would be really weird to have another state come in. I don't know of any other issue where that's how it works, right? Like California state ag inspectors are inspecting California farms, not the other way around. Go ahead, yep.
I'm a producer. I'm a Niman Ranch sheep producer from California. One thing that you got to worry about is, where are we going to go beyond Prop 12? California is facing a real crisis right now, where public is dictating policy. Some things good, some things not good. The biggest one that's hit California agriculture and hasn't hit the rest of the United States is the labor issue in California. And like, for example, what you say works in row crop farming and works for the fruit people or the nut people, one law to fit all does not work. With animals, when you got to care for, the comment is, oh, these guys work in livestock, work 7 days, 7 days, 24 hours a day. Yeah, they're animals, and we always have to be on call if there's a problem. But the government doesn't understand that, and the populace doesn't understand that. So this battle might be very beneficial for the Niman Ranch deal, and I agree with it. I don't like caged birds. I don't want the gestation cage. But I think it sets a precedent going down the road that there's going to be laws, like right now in our operation, we don't work Sundays. We only work a half a day, or we have to schedule. And you can't tell animals, well, we'll feed you on Friday, we'll see you back on Monday. But that's kind of what they're doing with labor laws in California, and that's going to hit the whole United States. And that's a concern, especially when you talk about the well-being of an animal. And that's one thing we got to be really careful on.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point, and I'm sure there will be state laws that come up and different ballot propositions that folks in this room will not support. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that before we go to the next question. We have more questions. Go for it.
Hi. What do you think the future of Prop 12 will be in other states? Do you think that California leading this will eventually it'll happen for the rest of the states, or will each state, do you think, put something like Prop 12 into effect?
I don't know if you want to take that.
We saw when the first round of these confinement bans, I think Florida was the first one, I think in 2004, and then Arizona, and then California with Prop 2 in 2008. What then happened is that these animal advocacy organizations would then go to the state legislatures and say, hey, this is sort of the wave. Let's come to a negotiated settlement here, or we'll just do another ballot initiative in your state. And so the kind of the fear of that happening just kind of brought everyone to the table. Because like in Massachusetts, they had 80% polling showing that Massachusetts voters wanted to ban the use of crates. And but even in progressive states, you have to go through an agriculture committee. And so for 7 years straight, the Joint Agriculture Committee kept that from even going to the floor. And so that's why they did this ballot initiative to go around that. And what do you know? It passed with 77.7% of the vote, exactly as the polling had shown. So it's sort of, you've got these sort of captured interests. So, but the threat now of ballot initiatives will sort of bring these parties to the table and have them, because,
And that's also being challenged in court, right?
it is.
Massachusetts,
It is,
yeah.
but again,
Yeah.
nearly every court that's looked at these issues, and I get it. I'm sure the oil and gas industry would love to operate in an environment where they had zero regulation on their production. Same thing like the nuclear industry, but that's just not the way the world works anymore. And so they've been able to kind of stymie these things through the legislative process, but now that there's this vehicle to go around it, I do think it's going to bring more folks to the table. And like you see, that's what happened with eggs. After a couple of these ballot initiatives, they tried to get a national bill, so there'd be a level playing field
Yeah.
across the board.
Yeah, and that blew up, yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Yep. Great.
Hi, I'm Becky with Butcher Box. My question is, what can we do to help push back against the EATS Act?
Call your representative in U.S. Congress. Seriously, it's that. I mean, people. I was a legislative director for a group before, and people are shocked when they hear that if a legislative office gets 5 phone calls, everyone's ears prick up. If they get 10 phone calls, it's like drop everything, 5-alarm fire, because so few people actually participate in the legislative process. So, as was said earlier by Chris, the big goal now is to keep it out of the House version, because the King Amendment made it into the House versions of the previous 2 farm bills. But what happens then, if it's in one and not the other, it goes to what's called conference committee, which is this total black box. You have no idea what goes on in there. There's all sorts of horse trading, and you have no control of what comes out. And whatever comes out of that, everyone has to vote up or down on. So the real goal here is just to keep it out of the House version. So look up your representative in Congress and call them and just let them know that based on all of these things and based on kind of the work that you do, you really want to keep it out and allow people to kind of decide. And again, it's a states' rights issue. Do you really want politicians in Washington dictating to states that they can't set their own agricultural standards? I think it's a pretty clear issue.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch how that plays out. It could end up being a poison pill in the House even. So I think we have time for one more question.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
The
Well, I'm
boss.
told. Okay, we're good. Anyway, thank you all so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you to Helena and all of the panelists. This has been incredible.